Jesus began his ministry with such confidence and boldness. If you remember, at least in the Gospel of Luke, he goes into the synagogue in Nazareth, and the scroll of Isaiah is handed him, and he unrolls the scroll and reads from the text that says, "The Spirit of the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to set free the oppressed, to let the prisoners go free, to announce that this is the time of God's Jubilee." When people realize that it means that they're going to have to change the way they do business in the world and in their faith and in their lives, they rise up to throw him off the side of the hill. But Jesus is undeterred. The scripture says that he passed through their midst and continued with boldness, with courage, with strength to announce that God's reign was at hand. From that point on, we see a variety of miracles. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear. Indeed, the poor are being welcomed and embraced as equals in the community rather than as the pariah. One would think that success in itself of seeing the effects, that Jesus would continue his ministry with boldness and with courage. The problem is that as it becomes evident that this reign of God is so contrary to what the norm and what the status quo is, that opposition becomes even more hateful and more angry against Jesus. That's what you hear partly in Scripture today. I'm sure, like any of us, it becomes discouraging when you think you're doing good and the effects of it or what you see is very minimal, right? You put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, perhaps a lot of mental, physical, spiritual, emotional time into something, and you don't get much a return from it. As Jesus comes perhaps in sight of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives are on one side. You go down through the Kidron Valley and up to the city of Jerusalem. Imagine standing on the Mount of Olives, looking to Jerusalem and seeing the magnificent Temple of Solomon. What you see today is the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome of the Rock, and off in the distance you see the Holy Sepulchre, which marks the site of the crucifixion and resurrection. But imagine that you get to that point, and you would hope, and we will see it in another few weeks, that you would be welcomed and embraced. Instead, there is apathy, no response. Sometimes I have done that as a teacher, where you are trying to do something good, and you're teaching, and they're just kind of sitting there like on their phones or whatever it happens. That it's just like, hello, is anybody there? Anybody home? Because I'm not getting any kind of response. I wonder if that's the source of Jesus's lament, and this is a lament over the fact that he had wanted to be like the image of the hen gathering the chicks in to, one, perhaps protect them, but two, to assure them by that connection and intimacy that they're going to be okay. In any event, he had hoped for so much, and what he gets is so little. And it will be even more, right, as the story will unfold, that even those who had been with him for several years in his ministry, even they will reject him, and he will stand solitary. He will be there solitary, alone, facing his death, crucifixion in death. So lament is a very important thing for us to consider. I think about it often. Somebody on Facebook posted a thing, like, imagine yourself back when you were 18 years old. What would you tell your 18-year-old self now that you are at this point in life? Well, I'm sure that if we can remember where we were when we were 18 years old, there would probably be a lot of things. Almost to suggest that we lament that some of the things that we had hoped for when we were young and enthusiastic and full of energy, and there didn't seem to be anything that would prohibit us from accomplishing whatever we wanted to, that there would be a lot that we might tell that person. In any event, the point is that when we lament, we are in grief, and grief over the loss of whatever it might be. Loss of hope, loss, especially in this time, right? 2.5 years, you think, maybe that's why everybody is rushing just to think that they can go back to normal. When the pandemic has suggested to us, right, that we still need to be cautious and careful and aware of the fact that it can come back again in another form. And so we lament that maybe we'll never get back to being normal. I think here at Chalice, if I can be so bold to make the suggestion that back when you purchased this property and began to build and to establish a community, that there was such excitement and enthusiasm, and we're going to conquer the world, and we're going to be that progressive disciples of Christ in the middle of Gilbert, and whatever religious character Gilbert has. We're going to be that voice for justice. We're going to be, maybe that wasn't even what you were thinking back X number of years ago to do that. And here we come to a point, right, where hard decisions are going to be made, and we can stand and lament over the fact that maybe the community isn't as large as we had hoped it would be. Maybe we didn't build a big church. Maybe we haven't. And so the grief can come and say, in that true, would have, could have, should have, all of those kinds of things that happen. What if we had done this? What could we have done here? And so we lament also that maybe we're not where we had hoped we would be and where we would want to be at this stage, even in our own personal lives, right? I often think about how the difference is for those who live with lots of regrets. And what regret is, rather than lament, is regret paralyzes and shuts down the possibilities that you can see opportunity in the midst of where you are. Regret closes us down and stops us from growing. So it can't be, even though we might think about regret, it needs to be something more dynamic, lamenting. And lamenting is where we do voice our grief, our sadness. But in doing so, you see, it opens the space, and anyone who has dealt with the 5 stages of grief, you know that there's a point where we resist it, where we deny it, where we just kind of resign ourselves to it. But the ultimate point that begins the transformation and change is when we get to acceptance. We accept the fact that this is going to be the way it is, but we know that there's going to be more that we will be able to do and able to accomplish. And in terms of death, we know that transformation and change will come to us in the next slide. And that is something to consider in it. But I want to think for a moment in terms of what Pat shared with us in the word and worship. I don't know if anybody has seen the series, The Chosen. You got to look at it. You got to watch it. I resisted it for 2 years until finally it showed up on Amazon Prime Video, and I could watch it for free, at least the first year. And it's very interesting that Jesus does not begin his public ministry where the gospel suggests it begins, with this grand seen in the synagogue in Nazareth. Rather, he begins his ministry surrounded by children, out in the wilderness somewhere, out away from Capernaum, away from Nazareth. And the children come and find him. And he welcomes them and he has them sit around. And it's interesting, the text that I suggested where Luke puts it in the synagogue, it's there in the circle of the children that Jesus says, I've come. Because the questions are really interesting, right? The gospel doesn't tell us what questions, but you can guess. What would you guess? Or some question that children, not necessarily of Jesus, but what kinds of questions do you think the children would ask? I don't think big theological things.
Who are you?
Who are you? And they do ask that in Chosen. Who are you? And Jesus kind of responds sheepishly because he doesn't, well, I'm perhaps the one that everybody's been looking for. What else? What other kinds of questions? The one bright young girl, little girl, they're all, not more than 10 years old, Abigail. And she says, where do you live? Where's your home? He's out in the forest. Don't you have a home? And Jesus says, oh, I've got a home everywhere, like that seems to satisfy the child, right? What else? What other kinds of questions do you think? Yes. The children would ask that? Okay, these are little children. What do you do? What do you do? What kind of work do you do? Now they see him in the Chosen, they see him working with wood. Well, it just makes sense, right? If he's the son of the carpenter, he's going to be working with wood. And they're very curious about that, about the work that he does. Where do you get your money? How do you get your food? So that it's all very simple and very real questions that get asked. And Jesus just delights in it. And you see him engaging the children in such a way that it's interesting in the story that the adults don't want the children to come close to Jesus. It's almost a lament, isn't it, in that sense, that it's so sad to think that often we as adults don't pay enough attention to the questions that our children ask because we can't be bothered with them, right? Although, right, and first time I watched it already, and Steve is watching it for the first time, and I'm wanting to tell him things in advance. Now, watch this, what happens. Pay attention to this. And so it's very interesting that we see Jesus engaged with the children, not really as an adult thinking they have all the wisdom to share with the children, but letting the wisdom of the child come out in such a way that he delights in the wisdom that they share. We might lament over the fact that we don't do that enough, perhaps. And I think about it in the community that I had worked in Sun Lakes, there were no children. At least sometimes we have children here that can delight us with their questions and with their joy and their energy and their enthusiasm. What happens in it is that in the exchange, and it's interesting, like Jesus asking the question, what do you think about this? What do you think about God? Who is God? And Jesus in the Chosen refers to God as Father. And they're kind of like, have you ever done that with your children? God is our Father. What? How does that work? You're my Father, not God up there. You see how that presents it? It presents us with a challenge to consider, as we were lamenting perhaps the change that's coming for us here at Chalice, to consider the ways in which that joy and enthusiasm and excitement can still transform and change us, so that in the mission and ministry that we might have in the larger community, that we can let others know that the wisdom that our children do possess, not in super theological, spiritual terms, but in simple questions, that it might be that what we have to offer is very simple, meaning uncomplicated things that can touch people's lives and enable them to be changed and transformed. I think that's what you'll experience. I think I shared the example, and this will be the final thing I'll say, that in my nursing class, we spend some time talking about the Imago Dei, the image of God, and how important a concept that is within Christianity. That everyone is to be valued and respected for the dignity they have equally. No one is less, no one is more. That physically we may not be normal, and physically we may not be like everybody else, but that's okay, because that doesn't change the kind of respect and dignity that one has. And a couple of the nurses then proceed to tell me that they work in prisons and how difficult it is for them to care for people who are murderers or drug abusers or whatever it might be. And I finally say to them, the first time that you say to one of those individuals, you are the Imago Dei, might be the first time in their entire life that they've ever heard that. That somebody said to them, you are valuable, sacred, holy in God's eyes. That may be the first time. And that might be exactly the moment at which change begins to happen for them. It doesn't change anything of their past. It can change everything for their future. And I think you kind of said that the people that come to iHelp feel that there's a place of safety, a place that's offering them something of shelter and food. That may be the first time that that's ever happened for them. There's nothing that we should lament about that. That everything that we should do to rejoice and hold that as being important. In The Chosen, Jesus continues to play with the children in a way that honors the joy in their lives and honors the way in which he's teaching us also about how openness to the simplicity and joy and the dignity that comes in every person.